We start with breaking news right here in Washington. A top South Korean official says U.S. President Donald Trump will meet with Democratic People's Republic of Korea leader Kim Jong-un. The announcement made just a short time ago at the White House. Let's get straight to CGTN's Owen Fairclough in our newsroom. And Owen, Trump hinted at this several times throughout the day. Walk us through the highlights of this amazing day.
Mike, it's been an amazing couple of hours, and that's saying something for the Trump administration, just days after South Korea's most senior intelligence and security official met with the DPRK's Kim Jong-un with that handshake to lay the foundations for talks between these two countries. He then visited the White House a little earlier this Thursday with a special message for President Donald Trump before emerging just a short while ago outside the White House to give us this stunning announcement. Let's listen.
He expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible. President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong-un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization. The Republic of Korea, along with the United States, Japan, and our many partners around the world, remain fully and resolutely committed to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Just consider for a moment, Mike, what Chung Yoo-hong was saying there. He's talking about two men, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, who've traded personal insults and, let's face it, renewed fears of an all-out nuclear war for these past months, now agreeing to meet within a matter of weeks by May. Normally these kinds of summits, these kinds of, or I should say these kinds of meetings take months and months to prepare. We're talking about a meeting between these two men happening in just a matter of weeks. And Donald Trump has once again upended the agenda. You mentioned all these movements going on throughout the day. Trump at one point came into the White House briefing room and said and told correspondents to expect a major announcement, teasing them up, and now this has happened on his doorstep. He also said, I hope you'll give me credit for this. So you can see the optics of this, Trump playing a major role in what appear to be talks between the DPRK and the U.S.
Owen, the skeptics will say, though, we've seen this movie before. We've seen talks involving the U.S. and the DPRK. They sometimes look promising, then they collapse. What are the chances of a real breakthrough this time around?
You're absolutely right. We shouldn't get carried away. Of course, talks have gone on between these two countries many, many times that have fallen through without any kind of result. A couple of things that are worth mentioning, though, particularly with what happened today. Kim Jong-un has offered to freeze nuclear tests while these talks go on, and critically has said that he will not object to joint military exercises between the US and South Korea that are due to resume after a pause for the Winter Olympics. Now, this has long been a bone of contention for the DPRK that feels that the US and its neighbor South Korea were antagonizing the DPRK by holding these joint military exercises. So that's quite a concession, really, already before these two men, before these two leaders have even got together. Of course, they haven't got together yet, and this is an enormously complicated subject. Mike.
Indeed it is. Owen Fairclough from our newsroom. Thanks so much. Now, we've gotten the perspective from Washington, D.C. Let's get the perspective from Seoul. Let's go to CGTN Shane Hahm. He's joining us now. As Owen pointed out just months ago, these two trading threats, and now we're talking about a face-to-face meeting.
That's true, Mike. Just a couple of months ago, quite an interesting turn of events over the past couple of months. The real first breakthrough we saw back on New Year's Day during DPRK leader Kim Jong-un's New Year's address. And I think it's important to point out today's announcement at the White House. It was significant and not a coincidence that this South Korean delegation led by the country's national security chief made this announcement just outside the White House. And it really shows you the role that South Korea has taken to get to this point for a possible meeting, something that would never been considered just a couple of months ago between the leaders of the DPRK and U.S. President Donald Trump. So South Korea's role in this really is as a mediator to facilitate this meeting taking place. We saw this delegation just a couple of days ago, earlier this week, getting off a flight after a one-night visit to Pyongyang. Now they're in Washington, and once they return from this trip to the U.S., the chief delegate is expected to travel to China and Russia, and the the nation's intelligence chief is expected to go to Japan to consult with neighboring countries here, Mike.
And so what happens from this point forward? What needs to be addressed before any meeting can actually take place between Trump and Kim?
Right, and you mentioned the skeptics and possible cynics out there that say we've been down this path before. We've seen the DPRK invite nuclear testers into the country only to backtrack on past promises, blaming the United States for not fulfilling their promises. So from this point forward, where the U.S. and the DPRK had differed in terms of a meeting is the U.S. has not backed down from complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And these had to be a precursor to any talks would take place. And now that we've seen this happening, it seems as though that Kim Jong-un, he understands that joint military drills between South Korea and the U.S., that they need to take place. So right now with summit meetings between South Korean leader Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un scheduled for late April, we probably won't see a lot happening to unnerve that schedule at this point. So we'll see from now until May whether that holds up.
All right, Shane Hahm, live for us in Seoul. Thanks so much. For more analysis on the situation, we're joined now by correspondent Nathan King. Obviously, some very big developments this evening.
Yeah, what strikes me very much, and you've covered DPRK for a long time, I have as well, the back and forth, it's very frustrating sometimes. But this is essentially a freeze for free. What do I mean by that? That basically Pyongyang have said, we're not going to test any missiles. We are potentially going to talk about denuclearization. You don't have to stop your military exercises. We're freezing everything. You don't have to do anything to come and talk. That is breaking the diplomatic logjam that has basically been a back and forth over the Korean Peninsula, over the six-party talks for over a decade now. So that's the first thing that strikes me. And it's quite clever from Pyongyang, because remember, in the last 6 years since Kim Jong-un has come to power, he's rapidly developed his missile and nuclear capability to the brink where he has a deployable ICBM force just around the corner that can hit the US. To pause there is to pause at a point where you have all the weapons you need, nearly, but not so much that it requires almost an attack from the United States. Maximum leverage, and also means if the talks fail, you can break out and have the whole nuclear arsenal that you need. It's very, very interesting development.
Talk to me about the timing. Of course, we saw this overtures between South Korea and North Korea during the Olympics, but why now?
Well, there are several theories, and I can guarantee, this Seoul delegation aren't just going to Washington. They are going to Tokyo. They are going to Beijing. They are going to Moscow. And in every capital, you'll have a different reason of why this has happened. Washington, I've just come off a conference call at the White House. They are pushing that it's the U.S. president's policy of maximum pressure that's got here. The emphasis on sanctions, diplomatic isolation is squeezing Pyongyang, and they have to come to the table, and this is why it's happening. You'll hear other things in Seoul. For example, it would have been, as Shane was saying, Kim Jong-un's New Year's speech and Moon Jae-in's acceptances of that, and the moonshine diplomacy, as it's being called in South Korea, where you bring the two countries together over sports, and then you develop the rapport with Kim Jong-un's sister, and then this visit that we just had from this delegation. And if you go to Beijing, it's been the constant. We've applied United Nations sanctions. Everyone has done that in lockstep. Pyongyang knows that the world is united, and the pressure for talks has come from that. The answer is probably a bit of both and everything.
And the U.S. president knows a great deal about sales, marketing. This is a big deal, but it could also be a big disappointment. What's the idea of success here?
Okay, if I was a State Department official or a national security official in the White House now, I would just be very, very worried. Lots of reasons. There are no diplomats in place that can deal with this. The State Department has top experts on the DPRK literally have left in the last few weeks. They have not been able to get an ambassador in Seoul. Victor Cha, one of the biggest experts on DPRK, who's good at negotiating. The State Department and the Pentagon, we understand, did not know this announcement was coming. So if you were preparing Donald Trump for negotiations with Pyongyang, who know exactly what they're doing, they're a very sophisticated government, you would be very, very worried indeed. Having said that, what has the US got to lose by talking? The big thing for Pyongyang is going to be that their list of requirements is big. They want security guarantees. And what does that mean? That means an armistice, an end to the cold peace at the end of the Korean War. They want security guarantees. They want a non-aggression agreement for the United States. They want investment in their economy and to be able to rejoin the group of nations. Can the US do that? And it also means the US would probably have to pull their troops out of South Korea.
There's a lot to
There's
cover.
a lot to do. I know I could go on and on. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thanks, Nathan.